Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. In his daily address to Canadians, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said 10,000 businesses had applied for the federal government's new wage subsidy since applications for the program opened at 6 a.m. Trudeau says the number of applications underscores the scope of the challenge that companies are facing because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Companies will be able to receive up to $847 per employee per week from the federal government, and the money should start flowing by May 7th. Meanwhile, Quebec and Ontario, which account for the vast majority of Canada's COVID-19 cases, are expected to unveil frameworks today for reopening their lockdown economies. Saskatchewan, PEI, and New Brunswick have already announced tentative timelines. A new survey released today shows half of Canadians who participated report their mental health has worsened due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The study by the Angus Reid Institute aims to shed light on how the economic uncertainty and social distancing measures brought on by the pandemic have affected the psychological well-being of Canadians. But a third, 34%, also said that they're grateful. Canada's crisis helplines are in crisis themselves and want $15 million in federal emergency funding. The CEO of Crisis Services Canada says there has been a huge increase in calls to distress centres across the country since the pandemic started. But Stephanie McKendrick says many of those centres are dangerously close to folding because of major declines in both volunteers and revenue. The head of the Canadian Council of Criminal Defence Lawyers says with the current backlog before the courts, he's concerned about increased pressure about delaying jury trials. Bill Trudell says Ontario and Saskatchewan are postponing jury trials temporarily, which are a fundamental right, but some people may not agree. Juror advocate Mark Ferrand has sent letters to Canada's justice ministers saying that he's worried that many Canadians will be afraid to sit on a jury in the future due to concerns about public gatherings and insecurity about finances and jobs. Police in London, Ontario say charges are likely after a church held a Sunday service in defiance of physical distancing orders. They say the church held an outdoor service even though it had been advised not to. About 50 congregants attended the service where they stayed in their cars and listened to a preacher on an FM signal. Investigators videotaped the event and say they will be presenting the footage to a prosecutor to move forward with the case. Well, Fort McMurray, Alberta is under a double state of emergency this morning, one due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the other due to flooding. Flooding caused by the spring ice breakup has already forced some residents out of their homes, and others are on evacuation alert. The municipality is at the confluence of 3 rivers, and it prepares every year for the possibility of flooding when the ice breaks up. U.S. President Donald Trump has been dealing with fallout over controversial statements at recent news conferences. Across the U.S., a number of poison control centers have reported an increase in calls after the president mused about whether disinfectants could be injected or ingested to cleanse the body of COVID-19. President Trump has maintained that he was being sarcastic with an offhand comment, but the administration is now deliberating whether to continue holding briefings in a modified form without the president. Meanwhile, a survey of U.S. business economists in mid-April found that 1/3 of their companies had shut down at least some of their operations. 2/3 had laid off or furloughed workers or cut their pay to try and minimize the impact of the coronavirus. The U.S. National Association for Business Economic Survey suggests economic prospects have nosedived. 86% of the 107 NABE members who were surveyed expect a shrinking gross domestic product over the coming year. Well, the historic crash in oil prices in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic is being felt across the Middle East. The economies of all the Arab Gulf oil exporters are expected to contract this year. Iraq faces the most dire situation, with officials looking to make spending cuts that could be painful for millions in the public sector. The blow to regional revenues further hurts populations that are already struggling amid coronavirus restrictions, raising the threat of new social unrest. Well, moving to Britain now, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has returned to work this morning in London after recovering from COVID-19. Outside his offices at 10 Downing Street, Mr. Johnson urged caution when it comes to reopening, saying the long-term consequences of a lockdown must be balanced against this risk of a second spike. The Prime Minister says Britain has reached the moment of maximum risk in the coronavirus outbreak. Meanwhile, a British government report has found calls to the National Domestic Abuse Helpline have surged by 49% during the COVID-19 lockdown. British MPs want the government to take urgent action to tackle domestic violence and make emergency funding available for social services. Researchers estimate at least 16 domestic abuse killings of women and children took place between March 23rd and April 12th, which is double the levels seen over an average 21-day period in the last decade. Well, China has been desperately trying to avoid a second wave of COVID-19, even as the country claims major progress on the first wave. A number of smaller clusters of the virus have been reported in the country. Harbin, a northern city of 10 million people, 2,200 kilometers from Wuhan, has been put under a full quarantine. China's overall death toll from COVID-19 stands at 4,633 among 82,830 cases. South Korea's unification minister is dismissing rumors that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is in fragile condition. He isn't revealing what specific intelligence led to that conclusion, but stresses it was reached after a thorough analysis. Speculation about Mr. Kim's health has been steadily intensified since he missed this month's commemoration of his late grandfather's birthday. Well, COVID-19 has hit hard, but last night, the stars came out to let Canadians know that we're all in this together and hope is on the horizon. That was the messaging behind a massive star-studded fundraising event for Food Banks Canada and frontline workers called Stronger Together. The show featured dozens of celebrities in a show of support for those on the front lines in the fight against the pandemic, including pop superstar Celine Dion. She addressed viewers in French and English, praising the heroes out there around the world who are going to work every single day. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.